what have been the elements that people have responded to the most that have outlined the universality of what you have to say?
I think shame and grief, not from my ex-religious people, but the shame of being different, whatever that difference may be.
This is Daring to Tell, the podcast where writers read their true stories of personal daring and where we talk about writing and life. I am Michelle Rado.
Nothing's gonna make me brave, and nothing's gonna make me brave. Nothing's gonna make me brave except doing what makes me scared.
How do I even begin to introduce this writer and this book to you today? I have been thinking about this for quite some time. Over a year, in fact, since the time that I first found out about this book and started reading this book. And time itself is one of the themes I considered. How long does it take us to read a book? And I say this in the grand sense with that we, but of course I mean me. How long does it take me to read a book? A long time. And the more I like it, often the slower it goes because I want to absorb it. I really like the contrast of reading just a little bit and then going off and doing something else, because I think that it's that juxtaposition of reading and life that helps it cook in my head. And the book we're going to hear today has been a real slow cooker for me. Cook is the perfect word, too, because that's her name, Peggy Cook, a person I first met at a writing workshop given by my friend, the writer Nina Lichtenstein. I don't know how Peggy first found Nina, but many writers do seem to find their way to Nina. I will say that Peggy's story is intense, and I think that's because it resonated with me so deeply. It was sort of like if my own soul had been plopped into a different body, this was how I would have had to cope, because we all must cope with the hardware we are born into. I'll describe more about that in a minute as we get into the episode, but in thinking again about this experience of reading this book and this idea of slowness, maybe I need to take it in all the more slowly because, in fact, reading a memoir is like a fast-paced embodiment of someone else's life. It's like living their story at 10 times real speed. 3 pages for memories of being a toddler, 5 pages for bringing back tiny scenes from an adolescence, 218 pages to make sense of a life. Because I think as writers, that's what happens. Our experiences simmer in our head. They live their own subconscious lives there as we sort of act out like a marionette puppet. But then at some point comes a moment when we might ask ourselves, how did this happen? And that lifetime of experiences are lived again at a breakneck pace when we may risk approaching what feels like a slippery bank over rushing rapids, afraid the current of emotion may sweep us away, and slowly we dare to perhaps put on some cleats and dip in. The pace may seem slow, but this is a crazy ride, life. We have to live it in real time, but with the pen, we can regain what I might call an illusion of control. Ha ha. Peggy, that one is for you, because the idea of life being an illusion is endemic of her true story about the simple but immense and human capability we all have to change our mind. I feel as if I haven't done it already, this is your official intensity warning. Peggy's story is tough. Maybe you'll need to take it slowly, just like I did. But remember, just like her, you are free to say no at any time. That is another little teaser that I love about our conversation today. By saying no, 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 when she needed to in doing the slow work of recovery, she was able to take control of how she might say maybe or even okay to exactly what she needed at the right moment for her. Okay. All this vagary aside, please meet a most intrepid soul, courageous writer, and delightful person, Peggy Cook, and her memoir, Released, Walking from Blame and Shame into Wholeness. Sometimes the conditions or circumstances we are born into are so distinctly formative, we spend a lifetime untangling. The writer that we will hear from today had not one, but two of those things. She was born with club feet and was born into a religion that espouses, quote, radical reliance on God for healing from any physical or even mental, emotional ailments. Released, Walking from Blame and Shame into Wholeness is a book that I have been reading and rereading for over a year now, knowing that we were going to have this conversation, which is so impactful to me. We will dig into more of that as we go, but all of this to say, hi, Peggy.
Hi, Michelle.
Welcome. Here we are.
Thank you so much.
Every time I talk with you is a treat. So this is no different, and it's extra special. Your book has been out for 5 years now. And so I just want to say, like, what is it like congratulations. And what is it like having your book out in the world? You know, that's a good chunk of time.
Yes, well, when it came out, I was still very, very shy about what I had written. I was almost shocked that I had written it and that it was out. So I started very slowly. I told some friends it was out. I put it on Facebook. I put it on my high school site. But COVID was also ending, and so there were no big releases at bookstores. And I was actually kind of glad about that.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I presented it publicly was at a writing workshop retreat where these were my cohorts and my teacher was there. So I felt kind of comfortable with that. But little by little, people started coming out of the woodwork, like they say. Ex-Christian scientists came out and said, oh, I had a similar situation, or, I lost someone because of it. And, little by little, I didn't get any horrible comments. I was really scared because I live in a town where I was a member of the church and I was very active. And some people said they couldn't read it. That was fine.
Yeah.
But then I got a little more confidence this year or the end of last year when a friend of mine from high school reached out to me who I had never said hi to. I knew who she was, but we were not in the same group, and she had read the book. And she wanted to talk about it. Would I talk about it? And I found myself saying yes, which was very strange. So I met with her. Then she wanted me to meet with her book group. So I did that. And I feel like, in a way, this book is my child.
Yeah.
It keeps growing.
Wow.
And I let it keep growing. I mean, I did not push it. I felt like, oh, you're being so developmentally correct, not pushing this, because I was not ready. I just was not ready.
Before you say more, because
Sure.
I want to hear more what you're going to say, but I'm curious to know, with that person, was it from your high school, you said? Who?
Yes.
What was she and what was her book group? What were they most curious to ask you or hear about?
They were most curious about how a person could walk around with club feet for 37 years and walk, they would ask me what was the pain level, and I would say it was high, and they'd say, what did you take? And I'd say nothing. I prayed. And so mostly it really was about that. And I have to say, though, the woman who invited me was such an advocate, because she was like, you would never have known that in high school. She just kept going, and but I certainly knew it. So there were just a lot of questions about that. It was a dinner
Yeah.
too. I couldn't even pick up a fork until the end, because they kept shooting questions, How
Yeah,
did you
yeah.
find a doctor? What did your family say? Just question after question. But at that point, at least I could answer it without feeling ill. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like physically sick from
the, just
angst
people
of it.
asking and also reliving it.
Yeah. But that must have been very heartening too. I mean, the opposite side, like, you could feel ill, but you were ready. And it sounds like that was your first little step.
That was it. I ended up writing a little piece about her, and I showed it to her. I called it a moment of grace, because just the fact that she reached out to me and wanted to know what it had been like, and just her really tender questions. And both of us were crying. We didn't even know each other. And she'd say, are you a crier? I said, yes. She goes, I'm a crier too. So we'd sit there and cry at the tea house. So
I love it.
that was a very big moment for me.
Yeah. And I love what you said about taking, metaphorically, appropriately, tiny steps into sharing this. And, even when the book comes out, being really like, what will happen next? And sort of allowing it to grow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have. It is an interesting metaphor.
Yes. And for taking small footsteps. And also just even the title, Released. I first thought of it because to do the surgery, it was a heel cord release. That's what it was called.
Oh.
But also just the release of all that guilt and pain and anguish comes gently.
Yeah. Gently and slowly. I didn't know that was the name of the surgery.
Yes.
That's actually.
Yeah. I know. I always thought it was really symbolic when he said, we're going to do a heel cord release on both your legs. And I said, release? And he said, yes. I thought,
Is that the first time the word kind of resonated with you?
Oh, yeah.
Or,
yeah. I mean, I knew nothing. I knew no orthopedic terms, nothing when I started.
Well, I feel like I don't want to necessarily get to the surgery, because that happens for you at age 37.
38. I planned it at 37 and it happened at 38. Yeah.
Yeah. Another starting line question is, when did you decide to write this book, and why?
It's got a long story, but I'll shorten it. And that is,
we got all the time in the world.
That is, I've had a wonderful therapist for years and years. And when I first went to her, I couldn't even tell her there was something wrong with my feet. I'm sure she maybe guessed, but I basically could not speak more than a few sentences.
Wow.
And I could not cry. And she was very, very patient. She just waited me out. And eventually we started to talk about it a little. And she said, could you write about this? Would it be easier to find words if you were writing on your own and then come and we could talk about it? And I said, no, it wouldn't be. And she said, well, I know you were an art major. How about doing artwork? And I said no to that too. But then I went home and I started doing artwork immediately, because she's so brilliant. I do whatever she says, basically, later. And
I was going to say, not necessarily right away.
No, I like to say no, because now I can, but then I did it. And so I started bringing her the artwork, and we started talking about it. I'd bring big pieces, little pieces, and we'd start talking about the feelings and why were the colors so dark and la, la, la. And then I started thinking, gee, maybe I could put a few words to these. So I started putting a few words, and that was helpful. But she and I would go back and forth about Christian Science and about I would basically say to her, she just didn't understand it. If she understood it, she'd know why I, stood behind it for so long, and we have a higher way. And I went on. And once again, she didn't say, are you crazy? She didn't. But one day, finally, she said to me, have you ever read any books by people who have left the religion? And I said to her, no, I'm not allowed to. And with that, we both I'd known her for like 20 years already, and we stared at each other, and I made a face like, uh-oh. She said, why aren't you allowed? I said, because then I'd be a dissident. And she said, what's a dissident? And I said, a dissident is somebody that disagrees with the religion. And with that, we looked at each other again, wide-eyed, like, uh-huh. And I said, do you possibly think I've been like in a cult because I haven't been allowed? She just looked at me. I said, I'm going to go home and I am going to order all those books on Amazon. And I went home and I ordered 6 dissident, but people who had left the religion, books. And they came very quickly, and I stacked them up on my night table. And that was like a very big aha moment. First of all, for a minute, I was angry at her for knowing this, but not telling me.
Yeah.
And I asked her, and she said, you had to come to this yourself. Because, I would debate with her. I would always be debating how it was such a great religion, but why had I left and why it did, Anyway, she was taking a writing course. She had to stop taking it because she was too busy. And she said, there's a writing course in California called Writing Down the Soul. And it's based on Jungian psychology, depth psychology, and you might be interested. And I thought, yeah, you might be interested if I was interested, but I'm not interested. But, just like how I always am, I went home and thought,
yeah,
because I had always wanted to write, but that's a whole nother story. But
wait, no. So what is that whole other story?
Well,
why you always wanted to write?
I always wanted.
This is mind-blowing too.
I always wanted to write, but my father was a writer for the Christian Science Church. My brother is a writer, and he worked for the organization too. And I never really could get my thoughts straight. I was always very confused about everything. And so when I was in high school, I loved high school AP English, but I only liked it because of all the readings we did. I could not, C minus was like the highest I ever got because I was just like all over the place. We had to write critical essays. I didn't have a critical thought in my head because I had memorized all the religion.
Yeah.
So I got a very bad feeling about writing, but I'd always wanted to write. And I taught elementary school, and I taught first and second graders how to write, not penmanship, but writing.
Wow.
And we would write little teeny pieces, like they were little mini memoirs. So I kind of went into that course with that feeling. I can't write, but I'm going to try. And who cares? These people don't know me.
Right.
But when I started, it just changed my life because people were so supportive. It was a memoir class. You could write whatever you wanted. I took a risk. The very first time I wrote my very first piece about this, and I thought, oh, please, are they going to believe this? What are they going to say? Blah, blah, blah. We comment on each other's work. The comments were, keep going. This is mind-blowing. I want to know more. I want to,
What was the first thing you wrote?
The first thing I ever wrote was about being taken to the hospital for casts without any warning.
Yeah. And that was when you were pre-words.
Yes,
even.
like
this is like
starting
baby.
at 1-year-old till about age 5. And I'd write to the teacher from time to time and say, I just don't think I could do this. She said, well, then write something else, blah, blah, blah. But I just kept going and going, and it really flowed. I'm writing a second, which is not flowing. But that book just flowed. I had all those images in my head, and it felt so good to get them out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I started, and I continued on for 6 years. But I published like I think the end of my third year or in the middle of my third year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fast considering, I think. I mean, I've talked with a lot of people, and sometimes it's a decade or more from the time they start writing.
Yes.
And I guess one thing that really surprises me is how locked down you still were for quite some time. I'm guessing that's like a long time after your surgery, right?
I didn't go back to church, but I just couldn't get the sense of guilt and failure. I just felt like if I had understood well enough, I could have been healed. You know, there was a parallel with, we can talk about it later, but my mom having a physical problem, very severe. And she did not have one iota of progress, and neither did I. But I'll speak for myself. I felt like it was my failure. Somehow I did not understand.
Yeah.
So that was with me for a long, long time.
Yeah. I am so sorry, because one of the reasons I will say that your story resonated with me is because I too grew up as a Christian Scientist. So when our mutual friend Nina Lichtenstein introduced us, she said, you know, this woman came to my retreat. Her book is all about, she had club feet and she grew up as a Christian Scientist. And I went, oh, really? And you live not far from me.
Right.
We live within a short drive of each other, which is also a lovely little, was a delight to discover. So when we met, I was like, I feel like we both looked at each other and we were like, so much to talk about.
I know. And I was so thrilled. I'm so thrilled when somebody will say so-and-so was raised, you know, and I'm like, oh, I need to meet them. I need to talk to them.
Yeah, because I totally feel you in terms of the, you know, like you visit a therapist and you try to get a hold of what is going on in your head. And it's very hard to describe what this inner journey was, I will call it, for lack of a better description at the moment. To be told that if you believe correctly or hard enough or the right way, your healing will come. And one other really huge, the thing screaming at me after what you've shared with me just now about working up to writing your story, which even in itself is a huge step. I love that you said no to everything along the way. I love that. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. I feel like I have this cantankerousness, I call it. And I go, no, I don't want to do that. Because you know what? Once you realize I have a choice, I get to choose. Feeling like there was so much that was like, nope. You're not doing this right. You have to figure it out.
And there were so many rules, and which I couldn't say. I would fight with my father about it, but I never won. And
right, there's no winning. There's no quote unquote winning.
So just having a chance to say no and see somebody's reaction, you know, like, are they going to tell you you're not listening to God? Or are they going to accept that? No.
Well, if that's where you're at this point, well, then
that's
like the patronizing kind of comments.
But without that therapist, I mean, she just waited. I think by the time I finally was writing the book, and I would bring pieces to her that were hard, and I would cry, and but I think she did understand the underpinnings of the religion by then.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you educated a lot along the way. Seriously.
Yeah. No,
I mean, you have to.
Yeah.
You have to, because to explain it. I'm thinking about Silenced, which is the name of one of the chapters I've asked you to read today. And I'm also thinking about what you've shared a little bit about your dad who worked for the church. And when you said the two things that became part of your step into wholeness, shall we say, art was one and writing was the other.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, you talk about a very, I'll say, heartbreakingly close kinship that you had early on with your father
Mm-hmm.
in really trying to connect with him and be seen in his eyes, you know, to really live up to what he wanted from you or what you wanted to be to him. And so art was a big part of that, and you wanted to be an artist.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't exactly encouraged in that direction.
Right.
Okay, so where am I going with this? You wanted to write, which you don't even talk about in your book,
Right.
which is kind of funny. I think a lot of memoirs, people write about their writing.
Right.
This was not you. You were an artist.
Yes, I was an artist.
You are an artist.
I try to be an artist.
Yeah.
Once I did get a diary. You know, writers are always saying, "Oh, I've always journaled." I got a diary once, and this sounds maybe very strange, but even putting words down on the paper embarrassed me. It's like it gave me a hint that maybe I was a person, but I knew down deep I wasn't a person. I was an idea of God, and it just plain embarrassed me. I couldn't go there. I couldn't show myself even in writing little things. So art was the thing, but then I think basically, which I've come to understand, like I guess as a mother in a way, is that you want your children to be safe and successful. And I think his life was basically based on fear. And so if he had said, "Oh yeah, be an artist, yeah, go for it," I think he was afraid, I'd be living on the streets. And secondly, they did take me for a diagnosis when I was a baby.
Yeah.
And I heard the story that, the doctor was very uncaring and very blunt and blah, 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 blah. Well, basically he was telling the truth.
Yeah.
It scared them or scared him. He was in charge.
Yeah.
So I like to think it was fear-based, that he didn't encourage me the way I needed to be encouraged.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's very interesting to me that they took you as a child to the hospital, which implicitly says how scared they were, because that was not part of their worldview.
Right.
And a lot of bravery,
Absolutely. And they were only 27 years old. You tend to think, oh, they were 55. What was their problem?
Yeah, I know.
But they were young. They were
young parents.
They hadn't had, there were no ultrasounds, I don't think, in those. They thought they were going to have a sweet little girl, like their sweet little boy. And
they did.
In a way.
With a few added challenges.
Yeah. But I mean, it was a shock, and people had different opinions. And
right.
So, they did, which actually I like.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said another thing that I wanted to pick up on, actually, before we have you read, and I want to get to reading pretty soon. But language is a huge thing, sort of talking about writing and eventually making your way towards words. I think that in my experience of this religion, I'm sure with yours, there are a lot of words that come loaded with other meanings than what might be used in a usual connotation for certain words.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the first one that pops into my mind when I think of that is healing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, language is one thing. In my typical style, I'm going to do one thing and then switch around. One of the things you just mentioned that you write about frequently, or, this is a recurring theme, is about being a person. That is really powerful. What did that mean to you, and what does that mean to you, a person? You wanted to be a person.
It was a longing from the time I remember being conscious. I felt like I didn't belong. I was not being seen because they were telling me I was God's perfect child. I was not being seen. They were not saying, do your feet hurt when you walk?
Yeah.
Nothing like that. All right. So, and then also because in my teaching, and maybe people still in the religion would say, well, there was your problem, is that I was very literal. And when I heard that I was an idea of God,
an idea of God,
yes, whatever that is, and that we don't dwell in the physical, and we don't dwell on error, meaning whatever,
meaning anything physical,
or anything material,
quote unquote,
even
bad,
even actually anything human, like having disagreements. We work for harmony. But anyway, so I always felt unseen and not like a person. And when I was writing in the book and I would pass them in and they'd say, oh, nice job or whatever, I'd say, I just want to be a person. And they'd go like, you are a person. I'd say, well, thank you. But, you just don't know. I'm not a person. So eventually through some support with ex-Christian scientists, I learned, that's no, other people in the religion hadn't felt like people either. Mm-hmm. And I felt like, I felt a little crazy, when I'd say to people, I'm not a person. So now I actually feel like a person, which is really exciting.
Isn't it great?
It's great to be a person.
It's great to be a person.
Yeah.
I tend to say I just wanted to be normal. Like I wanted to be regular. Like I just want everything to be regular.
Right.
I don't want to be special. I don't want to be
chosen.
Different. I don't want to be chosen. Oh God, I definitely don't want to be chosen. I was always don't pick me.
Well, I knew I could never be regular because I'd need to have a healing in my head because disability was not something that you talked about, approved of. Yeah. That was error too. That was unreal.
Right. Well, which is why I do just say to have this mental system in your head with a physical deformity that every single person around you and you see that you are told is not real. Wow. I mean, it's
mind-blowing and it's debilitating and it's not right.
Yeah, not right. I am so glad you wrote. I'm so glad that you said no. And then you thought, but what do I really want to do? Like that's the best part is saying no and then allowing yourself the permission to say, okay, what if I do? Maybe. What if I did want to say that? Could I imagine how that might work?
Yeah. What if I want to be seen? What if I took a chance?
What if I did want to? Exactly. What if I took a chance? I love that. Would you like to read a little for us?
Sure.
So I think that everything up to this point will make this chapter rather self-explanatory. But whenever you are ready, go for it.
It's called Silenced. And I start with a quote by a writer named Maureen Murdoch, who said, "That type of absolute authority has always rankled me, but I listened to it for a long time. Nail biting always helps me take command of my body. I'm not quite sure when the habit starts, maybe when I'm 5 or 6. When I rip off my fingernails, they grow back. I have proof I'm alive and have a body. I often doubt I'm a person like everyone else. I'm an observer of my own discomfort. Discomfort sounds less real than pain. I'm learning to, quote, unsee pain. As I begin puberty, I look in the bathroom mirror each morning, trying to distance myself from the imperfect image looking at me. I stare at that body. It lives alone, empty. It's my painful shell I cannot fully desert. It's my enemy that doesn't answer commands, and yet an ally that tries its best. When I need to walk, I move back into my body to give it commands. My back and hips ache from the torquing to keep from falling. I compensate for the inward direction of my feet and knees with every step. The cobbler adds wedges to my ugly tie shoes to keep my feet from rolling over as I walk. They don't help me with the pulling I feel in the back of my legs every day. So I bite my fingernails to the nub. I feel shooting pain as I get too close to the cuticle. Why does my family say pain is a lie about man? From a young age, I learn, quote, take possession of your body and govern its feeling and action. God has made man capable of this. I memorize this religious text as Sunday school homework, but I'm not capable at all. I'm alone in my reality, pondering my appendages. My parents stare at me. Maybe not. They're expecting me to understand enough about God's power. I can't. Sometimes Dad gets frustrated and accuses me of not being receptive to the truth. But to me, God holds court like the tooth fairy, which we weren't allowed to believe in. Only the truth. No Santa, no Easter Bunny, but an invisible God that can heal deformed bones. I don't get how this works. One of the hymns Mom sings to me every night says, I will listen for thy voice, lest my footsteps stray. But my feet stray continually. Perhaps I'm too literal. I do hear voices, though, not God's voice. The voices I hear say, you're ugly. They say, everyone can see the weird way you walk. Human encounters loom large to me. I could be obliterated at any moment by a nasty comment or a stare following me down the street. I believe these negative voices. They sound accurate. I have eyes. I keep my head down or stare straight ahead. And I shred inside. I rip off my fingernails, and they bleed. I see it with my own eyes. Finally, I'm in charge. I know the body has power. I live it. My fingers are raw and bandaged. I use many Band-Aids to cushion the tenderness. We keep them in the medicine cabinet where we have no medicine at all. I feel like I'm losing my mind and I'm always out of breath, but I don't run. Should I collapse? I can't make a scene. Scenes are unreal and inharmonious. Once, Mom collapsed getting into the car for Sunday school. My dad went over to her side of the car and lifted her into the car off the ground. No one ever said a word about it. I say, I'm scared. My father says, that's error telling you that you're scared. That's not you talking. I have many specific fears. Tests, teachers, gym class, dentists, fire drills, disagreements, shoe shopping, teachers, death, boys, birthday parties, musical chairs, and talking to grown-ups and kids. Add to the list fireworks, bumblebees, kissing my grandparents, graves and coffins, and never having a boyfriend. Every morning I wake up thinking, what scares me today? Doesn't everyone? My dad reminds me, quote, perfect love casts out fear. He knows lots of memorized citations, but I don't know how to love perfectly. At breakfast, when I see my brother, I want his life. David, the child who smiles in family pictures. My mother says, he looks like he just stepped out of the bandbox. I'm not sure what a bandbox is, but it sounds positive to me. It sounds like it describes how my brother looks. So handsome with blonde hair, perfect body, and always smiling. I stand behind my mother's dress when family members compliment David. I stand behind my dad when he tries to introduce me to his coworkers. I stand behind telephone poles during neighborhood games of kickball. I want to disappear. Yet from the knees up, I'm not deformed. Does that count? Each morning, my club feet become my everything. I pull back the covers to see if I have finally deserved my healing. When my grandma comes to see us from New Jersey, I walk into the kitchen to say hi. Minna, in her German accent, says with disgust, "Walk straight, walk straight." My mother sits next to her silently, peeling the potatoes for dinner. I always try especially hard to walk straight when Grandma visits. I try to twist each foot in the correct position, walking to the refrigerator, just to show her I can. I cannot do it for more than a few steps. Mom never reminds Grandma that I can't help it. Every visit, "Walk straight," slides out of Grandma's mouth with such ease and cluelessness. I'm not allowed to complain about foot pain, but she calls me out on the way it looks. Every night in bed, woolen blankets pulled up to my chin, I ponder these big questions. My throat tightens like I might cry. I toss and turn while the sheets tangle. If I run out of fingernails, I rip off the cuticle and then bite the skin on the tips of my fingers. I use a lot of Band-Aids. My father sees my tattered fingers and says, "You don't need to do that." Yes, I do. School becomes hell. I don't want to stand out. I don't even want to stand up. I never raise my hand. I tell my mom I feel sick, but she tells me, "That's error." So off I go to school. I throw up on my desk, afraid to run to the bathroom. I listen to conversations in my reading group. I have a different idea, but keep my mouth shut. I'm relieved when reading groups end, and I don't get a chance to read out loud. I can take the book away from my face now. As I get older, my feet start to have thick calluses on the soles and sides because I only walk on tiptoe. I can't put my feet down flat. There's no even distribution of weight on my feet. Eventually, when I'm around 11, I become my own podiatrist, although I don't know that word yet. The pressure on my feet is intense as I walk. If I tell my dad that the bottom of my feet hurt, he reads me a hymn or tells me to turn away from the physical. So I get a pair of sharp scissors from the kitchen drawer. I close my bedroom door and try to shave off the calluses. I've never heard of a podiatrist, not that we would go to one anyway. When I shave off the skin, sometimes the cheap scissors cut too deeply and gouge the pads of my feet. Podiatrists cut one thin layer at a time. I dig out the whole callus at once. The area bleeds. I'm shocked when I see the blood. I dab the area with a Kleenex. We don't use Neosporin. I don't have the right instrument for a foot procedure. I patch myself up with Band-Aids and put my socks and shoes back on. The bandaged areas sting. I try to walk, balancing a different way, but I have to walk on the balls of my feet. The rest of the day at home, I limp in my fluffy blue slippers. The next day, I have to wear my shoes with their leather soles. There's not much give to them. Who can I tell? Someone has to take care of my feet, so I do. My parents never look at the bottoms of my feet. They, quote, "behold the perfect man." I continue to be my own doctor. I do what I need to do without a word. I wish I could tell myself, my young self, about Dr. DiResta. There are doctors who do foot procedures without drawing blood. After surgery at age 38, I find a local podiatrist to help me when I have an infection or some part of my foot hurts. The minute I walk in his office, full of orthopedic footwear magazines, I feel at home. The office staff calls me Peg and always makes room for me, even on short notice. Dr. DiResta comes into the cubicle wearing a blue button-down shirt and khakis. He asks what he can do for me. The first appointment, I tell him my whole story. Born with club feet, leaving the religion, surgery, learning to walk again, still some issues. He looks at my bare feet and tells me what a talented surgeon I had. Dr. DeResta is my loyal orthopedic support. We've known each other so long now that we talk about our families and our hobbies and laugh about the sad state of politics. He never lectures me about the arthritis I have in my feet, ankles, and knees from waiting so long for surgery. Only once as he shaved off a callus, he asked, what made me wait so long? When I started to tell him my long tale, he looked like he might cry. He said quietly, that must have been so hard. Dr. DeResta is a master at getting my feet so they don't hurt for another 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I never forget to tell him how his expertise enables me to make up for lost time. I wish I'd known as a youngster that I'd be able to tell my story someday to a caring doctor.
Oh my God, Peggy, your reading is beautiful. Your story, your writing is
Thank you.
Is just breathtaking. I mean, I can vividly imagine the fear and uncertainty and just the like, okay, I'm just going to take matters into my own hands because I don't, there's not another option.
And I had to walk.
Yeah. I mean, to think about how painful walking must have been after trying to shave off your calluses. I mean, Jesus.
Yeah. It was always painful, to tell you the truth, but that was ridiculous. I mean, but I didn't know any better. I didn't have any other option.
Yeah. I have one of Michelle's existential goofy questions, but like, why is it so hard to allow people to see the pain? You know?
I know. I know. I always felt I needed to be so strong. I always felt if I cried, I'd never stop, which is like such that's what people say. But anyway, that's what I really felt. And I also knew that if I reached out to anybody, I was going against the religion, and I was trying to be such a good Christian Zionist so I'd get healed.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of things came into play. Plus our family was not, my mom would cry, but not about stuff like that. But my father was very stoic.
Yeah.
It was never, how are you feeling today? How was today?
Yeah. Because what would that mean? The minute you acknowledge something physical, like that's a slippery slope right down a steep, icy hill.
That's right. And if your father, who worked for the church, commiserated, what did that say about his understanding?
Yeah.
And about his job?
Yeah.
So it was lonely.
Yes, I know. And I'll just say again, I'm so sorry. And God, I'm so glad we're friends now.
Me too.
I'll ask a question about writing again.
Okay.
Because that, I think, helps anchor us. You have 5 major parts in this book. I wrote them down. Here they are. The child, the daughter, the patient, the warrior, and the transformed. And as I said, I've read this book over and over, absorbing it again and again. And I'm really struck by that organization. And so I'm guessing that didn't like pop out fully formed, but maybe it did. Like, how did you get to that structure? Because that's a very clear narrative arc, shall we say. And the story here is not what, but how,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
So how did you get to those, and how did the first story of that really ancient memory turn into the fully edited, thought out, clear direction that you have now?
Mhm. It's a good question. And it's another story of my therapist and I.
Mm,
And it makes me so happy the way this arc happened. And I'll tell you, I was reading a lot of trauma books, depth
yeah.
psychology books with very little understanding, but really trying hard.
Yeah.
And anything that inspired me, I made note cards.
Good.
And I had many, many millions. And at the point of the book developing, at the point where I had maybe like, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 pieces, I was talking to the therapist about, how am I going to structure this? We talked about it in writing class too, a lot. But how am I going to structure this? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And so I took the quotes
Yeah.
and I sorted them.
Okay.
And there was a pile of them that talked about the child, not me, the child, but
Yeah.
whatever. So I put
Like developmentally, kind of. Yeah.
yes. And the child who has no voice, and the this and the that. And I put all those cards in an envelope and I wrote the child. And then I had another pile of cards. I don't think they came in order like this, but I had another pile of cards that talked about getting help for yourself and
Mm-hmm.
being an agent of change. And I thought, wow, that sounds like how I was as the patient when I finally became the patient.
Right.
Put him in an envelope, the patient. Well, by the time the hour was up, I had 6 envelopes full of notes.
Wow.
The notes from the reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
And labeled,
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is telling me something.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what yet, but this is telling me something. And so I have a whiteboard because I'm a big whiteboard person because I used to teach school. And then on my whiteboard, I made index cards when I got home, and I put up the child, the next to it, the daughter, the patient, the warrior, the transformed. Okay. And the 9 pieces or 10 pieces I had already, I could see where they could be slotted in.
Right.
And so I was thrilled. I thought, hey,
that's really exciting. Yeah, that's like a big piece of momentum right there.
Yes. And so then as I would write my story, and I didn't always do it in order, but as I'd write my story, I'd put them on the board and I'd change order, maybe. Yeah. And there you have it. I haven't had quite as easy a time with what I'm writing next, but I feel like the stars kind of aligned. Like, we want you to write this, write it. We're not going to make it so hard that you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you also see like blank spots? Like once you had your columns, did you say, oh, okay, I need to fill in this one a little more? Because it's not, this is not a story in essays or a memoir in essays, as many memoirs, I feel like have been of late. But many are very, I guess I'll say, self-contained. Maybe I'm saying that only because the ones I've asked you to read today are kind of that way. Anyways, you had to sort of fill in, like, color within the lines, if you will, to go back to an art metaphor.
And I remember I didn't want to write a prelude. And so I remember my teacher saying, well, then you either need a prelude or you need to write a scene that's captivating that will make people want to keep reading.
Right.
So that's when I wrote Captive or something. I can't even remember what I wrote. And then one time I was getting kind of down on my dad, and my teacher said, do you have any piece of writing in your head that could show the soft side of your dad? Because nobody likes an angry memoir. So so I wrote the Master of Elmer's Glue. and then I had a lot of trouble doing reflections
Yeah.
because of my past, because of,
Yeah.
do I have a right to think about something? I don't know. So
I
anyway,
know.
so
I get it.
she and the group would work with me on that. And I wrote a couple of reflections.
Wait, this is the writing. This is in your writing class, not your
Yes. Yeah.
therapist. Okay.
We
Yep.
were online, for part of it, but we would have 1 or 2 retreats a year.
Yeah.
And we would meet in our cohorts and we would say what we're struggling with, or, like, I
Right.
can't
Right.
reflect,
Yeah.
and like, how could we go about that? So there was a lot of give and take. And we also posted our writings online on a forum, and everybody in our group would comment on it. We got
Right.
a lot of support and a lot of good info about how to go forward.
Right. Here's another question. I feel like I should wait till the end, but I'm thinking about it now, so I'm going to ask you.
It's okay.
As you've shared this book with other people, like in your writing group cohort and after publication, what have been the elements that people have responded to the most that have outlined the universality of what you have to say?
Great question. I think one piece of universality is feeling that you're voiceless, whether you're in a religion or not, or you're coming out of a religion or not. That voicelessness, that powerlessness. People like to tell you about their childhoods. I love to listen.
Yeah.
But, and it's not all about disability. It's not all about that. It's all kinds of different traumas. I think there is a great ex-Christian Science niche to it, in that people who were in the religion will say, this happened in my family. I always felt so responsible that I couldn't heal, or that I couldn't heal my family member. And I think another area is shame and grief, not from my ex-religious people, but the shame of being different, whatever that difference may be.
Yeah.
I think the sense of, hopefully it's never too late, speaks to people, that
Yeah.
you can make a go of it. You can patch your life back up. And I think just authority, and boy, I mean, it's so relevant for now or anytime. Authority. Who do we listen to? How do we get to have our own voice to fight back? So I think those are some major ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, I think you mentioned the array of ex-Christian scientists. Now, Christian scientists are such a huge force in the world.
Yeah, not.
The ex-Christian scientists are a far smaller.
Yeah, exactly.
Still. So, which is why I think when those of us who are in that camp find each other, it's all the more like, oh my God.
Where have you been all my life?
Where have you been all my life? Exactly.
But there are other religions that are strict, or make you believe a certain thing, or have told you something and then change their mind. And,
yes. Yeah. So it's not particular to this one, but this one does have some very interesting specificities, which, when I think about what makes a compelling story, or to go one step further, to write a compelling story, what is unique and what is universal, and sort of those two components that draw people in to be interested in what you have to say. So I'm always, as someone who comprehends quite easily the uniqueness of the situation,
right.
I'm always curious, what's universal about this? Because I don't know if you felt that way when you were writing.
Something else I was thinking just now was that the other thing that's so universal is the way we judge people. Like, I was taught doctors were unfeeling, terrible, in for the money, blah. That's what I was taught.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that was part of what scared me about when my father would threaten to take me to the hospital or doctor. I'd think, whoa.
Right.
But it's interesting when you find for yourself what the truth is.
Yes.
And I think it can go with many, many things in the world, that people people are pretty nice when you give them a chance. And,
It's like, oh my God.
yeah. So, it's everywhere. It's
Yeah.
everywhere. And what a lesson it taught me.
I will also say for me, that was huge. I didn't learn that they were cold or uncaring, but maybe just well-intentioned. And when you are treated by a doctor or by medical science, it is a temporary patch. And when you are healed by God, it is complete and everlasting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was presented, if I was sick when I was a kid, and I will say, I was not really a sick kid. So I felt like I could hold inside the thing that made me very different from everyone else in my class, and that I was exempted from vaccinations. And so if they were giving a vaccine in school, I went and sat at my desk while everyone else stood in line or whatever, which that tends to raise a few questions among one's classmates. So those were the moments when it was clear to everyone else that I was different. But for the most part, I could pass. I could hide what I knew made me very different. It wasn't until I was in my 20s, and I won't go into this, but I'll say it wasn't until I was in my 20s when I had a serious health issue that I could not pray away, or I will say wait for it to go away on its own. All that being said, it wasn't until I was 46 when I had a precancerous polyp in my rectum, which I have talked about before on this podcast from time to time. And this is where I feel, unlike every other person I know, I was so excited to be in the hospital. I was so excited to meet every one of my doctors. I loved everything about it.
Exactly.
My husband laughs. He's like, you're not like anyone else. No one really likes going to the hospital, but I'm like, oh,
somebody's going to help me.
Wonderful. They know what to do. They're taking care of me.
Yep.
Oh, the relief.
Not to mention, well, like for me, not to mention Motrin. And I mean, yeah, I know painkillers are not painkillers. I learned that. But boy, there's something in between.
Yeah.
Painkillers
sure
and nothing. So
yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes I feel like the bad person, but not really anymore.
No, not really. I'm so glad that you're, the not really. But I feel it. Yeah. It's like, oh, there's something fundamentally wrong with me. And that's why I have all the problems I might have.
But it's just, humanity. It's just being human.
Humanity. Yeah. We are people.
Yes.
Do you want to read the next one?
Sure.
I feel like this would be a chapter that would fall under the what is unique side of the fence.
Yeah, it is.
Where we start with this section you're going to read is about your mom as she went into what we'll hear is the Benevolent Association of Christian Science residence facility.
Yeah.
But before it gets to this point, she had been dealing with what we presume in hindsight was skin cancer.
Exactly. Yeah.
And do you want to just say a little bit how long she had something on her nose to start?
She had something on her nose. And my brother and I were horrified. We didn't know.
Yeah.
She started having practitioner help right away. It went on for 19 years. And it just ravaged her face.
Yeah. And a practitioner, I will clarify, is a person in the church who you call to help you pray for healing with a physical problem.
Yes, and she had all the best. I mean, she probably had 7 or 8 And they were all
Wow.
higher ups. I'm not blaming. I'm just saying
Yeah. No,
that's,
you were in the middle of the center of the
yes,
church.
yes. And
Right,
they would,
the mother church in Boston. Yeah.
exactly. They would visit her, or she would drive down to see them if they were on the Cape. And at one point, she was in a car accident and totaled the car. And the policeman came and brought her in, and her chin was deeply cut. And the policeman said, she should get stitches. My father came home. They ran off to get stitches. That was stitched up. But when she came home, her nose was the same. And cluelessly, now I realize, I was like, why couldn't the doctor, stitch up her nose? Well, if he knew it was cancer, that's not exactly, you don't just stitch,
Right.
So, there were times that there was hope.
Yeah.
But there was never one little second of progress. We'd have to go to the pharmacy and get bandages, and people would ask, is this person getting better? Or I'd go to the grocery store and get Kleenex, and they'd laugh and say, oh, that's some cold somebody has in your family. There are these moments that you just wanted to like,
Yeah.
So 19 years she dealt with it.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll go into this section that I'll have you read. So whenever you're ready.
This is called The Architecture of Healing. And I quote Marion Woodman, who was one of the founders, really, of depth psychology. There's nothing worse than meaningless pain and meaningless suffering. Taking my mother to the BA, formerly called Christian Science Benevolent Association, was like committing a loved one to a tomb while still alive. That's how I felt that Columbus Day in 1980 and long before then. The skin cancer on her face started in 1962. By 1980, my mom could not see well enough for my dad to care for her. When I was a child, if a family friend was at the, quote, BA, it was whispered about. The BA is supposed to be a place of, quote, refuge and healing. But too many of our family friends went there and never came out. When I asked why, my father always said, they waited too long, or they let it go too far. How do you know when you've waited too long for God to heal you? And how can you tell if the disease has gone too far when we never went to a doctor for a diagnosis? Dad's statement seemed as dark as the architecture of the building housing all this, quote, healing. I knew just where it was located on Route 9. We drove past it every Sunday on the way to church. The black and gold sign on the right side of the highway read, Christian Science Benevolent Association. It was up a steep, winding hill. I saw the castle-like architecture from the back seat of the car. That place is so spooky, I said. Don't take me there if I get sick. My father corrected my incorrect thinking. Many wonderful healings have happened there. Who got healed? I sincerely wanted to know. He never gave me specific names. I had a premonition of doom every time we drove by that gold sign. Now, years later, we drove up the driveway to the BA with my mom in the front seat. My stomach churned and my heart sank with grief. At 30, my fears about walking into the BA came true that fall afternoon. But I couldn't crumble. I was the strong one. I tried to keep up my perky banter, but I felt sick. My job was to maintain the facade of this being one more step in my mom's healing. The nurses and my dad appeared so cheerful as they unpacked Mom's blue Samsonite suitcase. Mom sat on the bed, expressionless. Mom lived in the BA for 13 months. Each Friday, I drove an hour down to our family home from Boxford, where I taught. I stayed the night with Dad. I visited Mom Friday nights and Saturday afternoons. I did the grocery shopping for Dad Saturday mornings and bought prepared meals that Dad could make on his own. I had been coming home every weekend for 5 years before this. I'm sure some of my feelings of responsibility for my mom's care came from the way we had never gotten along until I was about 20. I felt like I had to make up for lost time. I also had such pity for the life she was leading. I tried to make up for that by doing errands, making dinners, and telling her about my kindergarten students on the weekends. She'd wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. Mom loved to hear what songs I was teaching them, what art projects the children created, and how my observations from the superintendent were going. She knew I had fought long and hard to get a job. She remembered how some superintendents asked if I'd be able to keep up with the students with my feet. This job I finally got was a major victory. She delighted in my being back in Massachusetts after 3 years in California. I had no social life anyway, so weekends at Mom and Dad's filled the days. But the house was a hollow shell without my mom. Each Friday night, the man at the side desk in the entrance to the BA took the payment for the week. He smiled like I was paying a restaurant tab. I never made eye contact. I always wanted to yell, "Do you know what is happening? My mom is dying upstairs." I passed the ancient living room where an elderly woman was playing hymns on the grand piano. The smell of old pot roast and stale air enveloped me. In the winter, the oriental rugs drank up the slush from my sneakers. I headed quickly to the elevator. Up the elevator to the second floor, and the smell of sickness and death. Maybe I just imagined that each week. I felt like I was on a private death watch. I walked past my mom's room to check in at the nursing station. I heard the humming of the electric air purifier coming from room number 224, from her room. I was allowed to enter room 224 if no nurse was tending to Mom. The nurses changed her bandage and helped her shower each day. They cleaned her up after meals and took her to her private bathroom. After checking in, I tiptoed down the hall and knocked on her door. Mom expected me. I always arrived with some kind of care package. I tried to vary the offerings with her favorites. Mocha chip ice cream from Berkson's, pantyhose from Woolworth's, a smaller size of underwear, and of course, multiple boxes of the softest Kleenex. I hoped these gifts would make up for the solitude she endured during the week. I sat on her bed next to her, and she held my hand. Each week I felt my stomach drop to my feet when I saw the progression of the disease. The bandages had gone from covering her nose to her nose and one side of her face, and then to her eye. It looked like her upper lip would need to be bandaged next. I kept wondering, when was enough enough? I tried to deny my negative thoughts. I tried not to dwell on how she looked. I knew I was not helping the healing. I lingered outside Mom's door after saying goodbye each week. I hoped she'd still be alive the next Friday. I stifled tears until I drove down the steep driveway. Then I sobbed for the first half hour home on Route 95. The second half of the trip, my mind went numb. I drove into my apartment driveway, not remembering how I got home. I lay on the couch in a drained stupor until darkness. I called my mom each night before I went to bed. She begged me not to hang up. She was now the child, and I was supposed to be the soothing mother. I read hymns to her until she calmed down. Then it took me hours to fall asleep. All night I heard her childlike, frightened voice in my head. The hymns did not have the calming influence they once had on me. My stomach lurched. If only I could demonstrate what the hymns promised, healing. David lived in Michigan with his first wife. I had the time to give to Mom. All of the patients on the second floor of the BA were relying exclusively on, quote, God's power for healing. That meant there was no pain medication, antibiotics, no intravenous feeding. The bed was a hospital bed, but its only function was to prop a head up or lay it down. There was a call button in case she needed help getting to the bathroom. I had to numb my feelings and pretend this was fiction. I had to steel myself for the, quote, testimony of the material senses, which I had learned was false. Mom's situation seemed so real. She could hardly talk anymore. When she ate, the food ran out of her destroyed mouth onto her blue bib. My mom was not allowed to attend communal hymn sings in the living room downstairs. They told my dad it might, quote, disturb the others who were seeking healing. She was never allowed to leave her room. It greatly disturbed me that she was virtually a prisoner. The hymns in Sunday service were pumped into her room by loudspeaker, and she lay there alone. My father told me sometimes nurses left her room and cried. They found it difficult. That was an understatement. The skilled care they provided, that is, bandaging, only went so far. It was not the nurse's fault. It's the only service they were trained to do. The stench was overwhelming. I started bringing 3 air fresheners to her room each week. The electric air purifier never made a dent. I'm not sure if Mom could smell her own room. We never talked about the smell. That would have made her condition a, quote, reality. Sometimes the urge to fall to the ground and scream enveloped me, but I'd learned to control myself, even in impossible situations. I was supposed to act steadfast in my faith in God. No wailing allowed. The head nurse wanted me to bring Mom some beef bone broth. She felt Mom was not getting enough nutrition, obviously, but since we didn't have an IV for beef broth, how would it go into her mouth and belly and stay there? How many calories could beef bone broth possibly have? I was already having trouble finding underpants small enough for her. She was clearly losing weight each week. Was God her sustenance? Or was food? Or neither? I was getting more and more confused, desperate, and depressed. I made her a gallon of beef bone broth from steak meat and brought it over whenever the nurse requested. I felt like I was losing my mind, my heart, and my mother. Could I be the only one who knew how this would end? Why didn't anyone else notice or step in to save her? It seemed to me that Mom was being abused and neglected. Her agony so obvious, her solitary confinement extreme. If they could not help her despite their healing expertise, was it not the responsibility of someone to get her medical help? That someone, should it have been my dad or my brother or me? It's a question I have to live with. I tried to bring solace any way I could. I decorated her room with leaf motifs in the fall. I scoured church fairs for a fabric Christmas tree that fit on her dresser in December. When Mother's Day rolled around, I bought the smallest pastel sweater I could find. My father relied on my brother and me for support and help. He rarely asked for help from any church friends, although they knew she was in the BA. Word travels fast in our small religious community. Of course, if we reached out, we might be suspected of not acknowledging our, quote, victory over the 5 physical senses. We might look like our hearts were breaking rather than knowing that, in quotes, man lives and moves and has his being with God. So we shouldered the burden alone. I couldn't tell any of my teacher friends where I went every weekend. They wouldn't believe that I was watching my mother die without medical care. I didn't tell my Christian Science friends either. I didn't want to make a reality out of error. I kept wondering if this was really the way Mom wanted to end her life. Maybe my thinking was not helping her healing. I wondered if Dad had asked her recently if she wanted to go home and pass on there, or go to a hospital, however late it was. I wonder why didn't I ask that? What percentage of the blame is mine? She continued to call her practitioners daily. In fact, by the time she died, their numbers were on auto dial. That's not a joke. It haunts me that she did not live one day for 19 years without physical pain. When I visited, she'd never talk about pain, but it frightened me like a monster ready to devour. She winced and cried out, but then she'd ask about what I was teaching at school. How was David's job? And when Dad would visit next. Mom told me about the nurses she loved and all about their families. I heard my father admonish her to, quote, pay attention to what is important. It sounded cruel to me. He got to stand up and walk out of her stinking room each week. I wondered if my mom felt betrayed by her practitioners and her family members who kept telling her what to do and how to think. As a teenager, I heard her once telling my dad she wanted to go to a doctor. She cried, I can't take this anymore. She wept and sounded desperate. I had momentary hope for her relief, but I should have known better. My dad said it would be wrong to get a diagnosis. He asked Mom, do you really want to open yourself up to that? She backed down. She was alone with her anguish. Why didn't I run downstairs and say, I will take you, I will help you? What was I thinking to hide behind my closed door? She died October 14th, 1981. She couldn't breathe. There was no oxygen in her room, in more ways than one.
Oh, Peggy.
It's just that last line that gets me.
Yeah. Oh my God, what a powerful and devastating story. And I am so sorry.
Thank you. I know it didn't have to happen.
Yeah. And it's so hard to be in the middle of not knowing what to do. I mean, it's
I know.
the hindsight, you say, oh, what should I have done? But I understand how in the middle of it, these are things you're not allowed to think.
Exactly. And these are things that even if I was the most brazen of daughters, I had no idea how to find a doctor. I mean, it sounds ridiculous because now I can find a doctor in a heartbeat.
Yeah, right.
But I had no idea.
You don't know what you don't know about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing was there was not supposed to be in harmony. And if I had started pulling for that, I was basically full of like fear and terror. I mean, really.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. That was so powerful to hear you read. And I'll say to hear you read again, because I'll take another sidestep from content to form for a moment to say, this isn't the first time I've heard you read it, because you also read it as you were reading for me in producing this book into an audiobook. which I am, as of this very moment that we're recording, I am still working on.
Mm-hmm.
And honor is not the right word. I keep thinking about what's the right word. It was really meaningful, impactful for me to be able to work with you on this book. And I think us doing this together was a new transformative experience and a layer of a whole bunch of transformative experiences that you talk about.
Yes, definitely.
In the writing of this book. And so, I'll say, I feel like I hear in you in this reading, even a deeper emotional telling of your story. And why do you think that is? I mean, reading this out loud, you've told me, was yet another transformative experience for you. What does it mean to read? I am always just trying to wrap my mind around this. What does it mean to read our stories out loud? Why is that so important? Like, why does that matter?
Oh, it mattered in lots of different ways for me. One was I felt like it was time to do that. I had never considered an audiobook, but when I heard about your work and I met you, I thought, now I could do an audiobook with her because you would understand. And even while I was reading it, I would know that you were saying, yep, this happened. You weren't saying, oh, please,
Yeah.
And so that was really important to me. I don't think I can ever thank you enough or give you enough accolades, because I was so comfortable the minute I walked in your house to do that at your studio. So that was one thing, the Michelle factor. The other thing was I was ready to use my voice on it. Yes, I wrote it. Yes, I presented just a couple times to a group, but I was done with the shame of having done it. Like, there's no more guilt in having written that book. I felt a lot of guilt. It wasn't like I was trying to pay anybody back, but it was more like, oh, I wish I didn't have to write how this didn't work for me, but it's true. But this time I realized, why it didn't work for me. It also, when I was in that booth, I felt like I kind of gave over. This sounds weird maybe, but I kind of felt like I gave over my psyche to the project. Like I was just expressing what was true, what was reality. I was always being told my reality was not reality. So finally I could read with conviction that this was reality.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing for me is this sounds like an old Christian Science term, but I'm so grateful that I did write it, because it opened up a whole new world for me. It unlocked my pain. It's still reverberating. I'm still having therapy. I'm still having EMDR, but I go forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I love the word reverberating. And I feel, I wasn't fishing for compliments, but that I know I am equally grateful, and it's just so honored to hold that space for you, literally here in my little closet.
It wasn't a job, it was
right.
It was more than a job.
Oh yeah. I mean, there is something that is beyond what I can express with words about the vocalization of our stories. And it's why I go to recordings of writers who have read their own stories time and time again, and why there's something transformative. Again, I can't come up with other words than these. I keep trying to think about it. It's funny, going back to that idea of language. Sound can communicate so much that when the words sort of fail us, the sound of what we have to say can tell a deeper dimension of meaning and of emotion and of identity, to really get a sense of who you are. I get
Yes.
to hear you tell me.
Yes. And all my life, I had trouble finding the words. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so reading the words was also like a celebration for me that, yeah, you did find the words and you can keep writing and find the words.
Yeah.
And that gives me hope, for my future.
Yeah. One of the reasons I have trouble with the word healing is because from the definition that we know that we were raised with, there is a very neat implication, an implication of a very neat, finalized package of doneness. Like, okay, now it's done. I have a healing and it's over. And I can go on with whatever the going on is. I don't know why you need to go on if everything's done, honestly, right?
Right. If you're perfect, well,
like, what's the point of that?
Yeah.
But I think that the healing in our colloquial, regular personhood term is, I talked about this with another podcast guest, is an ever-evolving state. And that I feel much more comfortable with. And I have not necessarily come up with the word for that yet, which is maybe why I go back to things like transformative or magical, which it's a whole other kind of magic, honestly,
Yes,
that I believe in.
It's like a word, numinous. I never knew the word numinous.
I love
before
that
I did writing.
word.
But
Yes.
I love that word because it's like you can't put your finger right on it, but it's there.
Yep, exactly. That's what I seek. The numinous.
Me too.
The transformative.
And every one step of healing is another step for more healing. And I mean, that's not like Pollyanna, but it just, it keeps going.
Yeah, exactly. I want to, again, say thank you for that. I want to thank you for sharing your mom's story.
Oh, thank you. It needed to be told.
Yeah. And the fact that you included it is a tough one, but I'm glad that you did. And it was another thing you needed to do.
I'll tell you one thing. You don't have to use it, but I'll tell you one thing is that I never realized how connected my mom and I were until the writing of this book. And this is how I look at it. Not everybody has to look at it this way, but I look at it as my watching her was her way of saying, you don't have to live like this. No, it wasn't my nose, it was my feet. But you don't have to live like this. Watch this. Use what you need to do. And so that's another connection that I learned about through writing this book.
Yeah. There is a full circle, deeper meaning that comes for anyone who does. And I urge you, listener, to pick up the book, to listen to the audiobook when we have it ready and out. Yeah, that there's a much deeper layer of meaning that happens there. Yep. You keep mentioning this other book you're working on. Do you want to say anything about it at all? I think sometimes it's like
not too much.
Ill-advised. Yeah, like don't talk about a thing. We can't talk about a thing when we're working on it.
No.
Yeah.
It's not coming as easy, but it's I need to do it whether it ever gets published or not.
That is the only reason. Sometimes there's other reasons. I always have to instantly counter any declaration I made. That's the only reason.
Sometimes
Michelle Rado will say why anyone should do anything, because you have to for yourself.
Yes. And I question that a lot. I question whether I want to. even though it's practically, blah, 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 I won't say. But, you just keep going and you see where it ends.
That actually, you brought me right into something that I thought, if it works, I will read this.
Okay.
So another book I'm listening to right now, which I will say, I wish was narrated by the author.
Oh, wow.
It's nonfiction.
Okay.
It will seem quite incongruent, but it is called After the Pole by a Norwegian. And I'm going to say his name wrong. I'm going to try and get it right. I'll say it again. It's something like Erling Kage. I'm asking Nina to help me pronounce it. So I discovered this writer like 3 different times individually. The first one that I found by him is called Silence. The next one I found by him, which I didn't realize was by him, is called Walking.
Jeez.
You might be interested in that.
I have to read this.
And then the most recent one is this one called After the North Pole. And he maybe the only person, I think the only person who has walked to or across the Antarctic, the Arctic, and Mount Everest. I don't know. Like, he's an incredible outdoorsman, but extremely philosophical. Yeah. So anyways, that's a long way of getting to. I was thinking about this before our conversation today, and I listened to this paragraph that I will read in closing. Mm-hmm. He's talking about Petrarch, who I don't know really that much about, but sounds fascinating. And I know he's one of those classic guys you hear about. And beyond that, I go, who is Petrarch? I don't know. Somebody I have to go look up. Petrarch and anyone else who likes to hike does so for more than one reason. And yet his one motive for climbing Mount Ventoux, I'm not going to get that name right, to simply see the view, strikes a chord and preempts George Mallory's famous answer to the question, why? Because it's there. For me, Erling Kage, both show how little there is that we must do in life. No one must climb Mount Ventoux or go to the North Pole. There is much more that we should do, can do, but little that we must do. If you choose to go to the North Pole, things may turn out well. If you sit at home in your chair, all will probably be well. But things that come too easily are soon taken for granted. There has to be a price, some form of discomfort. The cold, wind, thirst, and steep slopes. Satisfaction comes from continuing to move laboriously forward in the right direction, no matter what. Not knowing if you will reach your goal. That is when life feels real. Time expands.
I love that, Michelle.
Is that just not jaw-dropping or what?
Yeah, I'm ordering that book right now. Wow.
And I thought that would be a very lovely quote to end our conversation with today.
Thank you.
Peggy. I love you, my dear.
I love you too, and thank you so much. Thank you.
Doesn't Peggy have the best laugh? I think she has the most fantastic laugh. She is such a dear. I don't yet have a pub date for her audiobook, but I will say I am hoping to have more conversations with Peggy in preparation for its release. You can, of course, get the print version right now, and the link for that is in the show notes. It's also not until I am recording these comments at the end of my episode that I often think of a word I can tell I was reaching for during the episode. And when I was saying I want to just be regular, the contrasting word I know I was reaching for was perfect. Not, I said special, but it's actually perfect. I don't want to have to be perfect. I just want to be regular. If you happen to be curious about the process of recording an audiobook, well, I will be doing a Zoom presentation with my friend and former audiobook client, Nina Lichtenstein. We did it once in person at Curtis Memorial Library in Brunswick. It was very well received, so we thought we would do it again on Zoom this time. Nina and I both loved sharing our thoughts and questions and expectations we each had before, during, and after the recording. If you missed that, here's your chance. It's going to be happening Sunday, March 22nd at 11 a.m. Eastern Time Zone. On Zoom, it's free, and there is a link in the show notes where you can sign up for that. A reminder to click follow in your podcast app where you are listening so that new episodes of Daring to Tell will automatically pop up when I release them on the first Thursday of the month. Yes, the extremely rapid pace of monthly, which is about what I can manage at this moment. Writing a review, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, really helps other people to find it. So that would be fantastic if you would do that, as does sharing it with a friend. If you go to my website, michellerado.com, there's a couple things you can do there. I know I'm telling you a lot of things, but I think you can handle it. At my website, michellerado.com, you can hear samples from all of the audiobooks I have produced up to this point, which I am really proud of the little catalog I am amassing. So that is at michellerado.com. And also, you can sign up for my newsletter there that I put out monthly. It is called The Redo. Again, michellerado.com. My thanks go to the very dear Peggy Cook for her courage, not only at every step in her life, literally, but also in her creative process. I am so glad to have found you, Peggy. Finally, as I get ready to wind things down here, I was thinking I'd like to share a special song that popped up in my head as I was listening back to our conversation. It's a song by my husband, Phil Rado, who is also a creative force behind all the songs you hear on this podcast. Lastly and bestly, my thanks go to you for making it to the very end of this episode and for daring to listen.
People change. Days turn into other days. Turn into different days with the rhythm of another place. You try to earn your wings and you embrace the ancient things. The days they don't remain, they will change. And I'm well on my way. I'm well down the road to where I was before I was born. And it's not the end, and it brings me peace. It gives me hope that I'll just start again. And life is out for blood when the blood still runs, and we cry when the well runs dry. It'll change. Days turn into other days. They turn into different days with the rhythm of the falling rain. We're treading water, and we're running in place. We're trying to do the same old thing, but the days they'll change. Life is out for blood when the blood still runs, and we cry when the well runs dry. Faces change and days turn into other days. They turn into different days with the rhythm of another place. And we are dancing, we are living. Throughout our days, we will change.